Welcome back to Sika Strength and welcome back to Sika Stan. We are some powerlifting coaches. My name is Owen. This is Dara. We've coached people across a variety of the spectrum on powerlifting, from their first 120 kilo squat to their 300 kilo squat in competition and anywhere in between. And one of the things we see quite frequently, and it's bound to happen, and if you've done more than one powerlifting prep, you'll know that this has come up, and that is an injury near enough peak. Now, there's a couple of different ways injury manifests itself, and we really need to assess what's going on. So step one is really being honest and objective about what's just happened to you. So there's a couple of different injuries that might crop up. The first one, very, very common one, is a RSI, or repetitive strain injury. And this can manifest itself in a couple of different ways. This might be your elbows have started to get a little bit sore, or your wrists a little bit sore on your low bar squat. Maybe your shoulders a little bit sore on your benching. Your back is starting to get a bit achy while you're deadlifting. And it's making things a little bit uncomfortable, and it's starting to progress a bit in pain. The other thing we can have are acute injuries. They can be minor, like maybe a small hamstring pull or a little bit of a pec pull, to large, very devastating injuries like an avulsion fracture. You've ruptured your Achilles tendon, you've torn the quad off the bone. These are very obvious when they happen in terms of the large scale ones, and the answer to that is very, very obvious, is you have to stop. But anything else before that, there's a big spectrum of stuff going on. So first of all, we need to realize what it is, and then we need to see what it is that we can do with that after. So if you're on week 3 and there's 3 weeks left before your powerlifting competition, and your elbows are starting to get a little bit sore, they're 4 to 5 out of 10. It's pretty sore. In any other time of year, you'd probably be addressing it immediately, but you're nearly at the competition. You've 3-4 more squat sessions left, and it hasn't gotten sorer from that 4 or 5, but neither has it gotten better. You're kind of in a situation where you go, look, this is a competition. I've been prepping for 20 weeks or so for this competition. I can keep going for the next 3 weeks. Realistically, I'm not going to make things worse. However, you can feel your hamstring pulling a little bit. You've had a hamstring tear before on that same hamstring, and you're coming up to competition, and you need to decide, is this really valuable to keep going? If this is just a qualifier for national next year, and there's 4 more chances to qualify for nationals, it doesn't make sense to keep pushing and risk pulling your hamstring on a deadlift. However, maybe you're going to the Clash of Clans world record backbreakers, and there's 50k on the line for the biggest deadlift. It's probably worth it for you to go attempt that hamstring tear or hamstring pull for a couple of €1,000 or dollars. So the first thing you need to do is just be super objective about what's going on and how sore it is. Because very, very common is not that people are too big a bitch about their injuries. It's actually the opposite. People are very, very afraid of their own objectivity, and very often when we're training for competitions, you're in that mindset where you're like, no, this is hardly any pain. Whereas a lot of people would be immediately going to their GP looking for painkillers. When you're powerlifting, you're like, no, this is just part of powerlifting. My elbows aren't even that sore. They're just barely hot to touch, even though they're pain doing everything in your life. So you need to be super objective. You need to remove the kind of self-abuse, but you also need to be kind of honest and look, can I push through this? So depending on what side of that spectrum you're coming in at this from, assessing what's going on is super important. So the second step in helping you assess that is go see someone. So this is so valuable. Don't waste time asking your buddies. Don't waste time Googling it on the internet, although sometimes that can be very, very useful. Best case scenario here is you go see someone. Now, it doesn't matter if they're a physiotherapist, a physical therapist, a chiropractor, a neuromuscular therapist, a Reiki healer, a Twitch streamer, whoever it is that you know is reliable for you to help your injuries is what matters. The person doing the injury rehab or assessment is the value. What their title is doesn't matter. Finding that person is the problem. And one of the best ways you can go about finding that is asking your friends or asking your teammates or seeing lots of different people is the only way. Unfortunately, there's no trust pilot really for therapists in your local area or finding people. So start by asking your friends, have they seen someone good recently, or have you seen someone that you know you can immediately go to? The best case scenario is you have someone who's known your history, who's seen you several times before, helped you with similar injuries. Maybe they've helped you with the same injury, and you can call them up and you can say, look, Dara, my hamstring is fucked again. Can I come in and see you with a competition in a couple of weeks? You need to get on top of it and see if I can do something about it. That's a great place to be. So having someone in your corner who you have a good relationship is invaluable. Now, the better those person are and the more experienced they are, the better it is for you. So it's worth putting in a bit of time and finding those people. Unfortunately, it is a bit of a minefield. You can frequently see people who are 50, 60, €70 for an hour, a half an hour, and very often they're advice or help doesn't prove productive. It is unfortunately like all professions, and any healthcare is similar. So finding someone good is difficult, but once you find that good person, you need to hang on to them and keep a good relationship with them when things like this arise. So you assess what's going on, and then preferably if it's crossed the threshold of you need to assess what's going on, you probably would benefit really well from going see someone. And don't waste time, just go see them sooner rather than later. You've put in weeks of prep, hours of your life for this competition. And if you're near the prep and something's so sore, you're like, oh, something's going on, just go see them, spend that little bit of money, spend that bit of time, and it could make all the difference between a much smoother prep or disaster.
Yeah, that really is the cost of institutional knowledge. You might have to go through 3 or 4 of those individuals in a row, but every time you go to someone, even if it doesn't work out, you've at least gained that knowledge. So now, number 3 comes along the same lines of gaining knowledge, and that is have a plan for your rehab. All too often when we'll see someone, or maybe we'll start thinking about how to rehab an injury ourselves, we will put in place a session. So we'll pick 2 or 3 things that we know are good and beneficial and positive for the rehabilitation of that particular injury, but we won't have a solid progression scale for our actual rehab work itself. Now, this all comes with the caveat that the first 2 or 3 pieces of that progression might be, firstly, no movement or immobilization completely. After that, it might go to something as simple as walking. Then we might be going to something as simple as some physical work, like moving our body around, some air squats, some non-weighted lunges. But it's very important that from the start, we understand that there is a full plan here. Now, this starts off with when you're talking to that healthcare professional. When you're in that physio room where you're sitting on the bed and they're going through the rehab exercises, ask them the question, what happens when I've done 4 of these sessions? What happens on week 2 versus week 3? And where is the ultimate aim of this rehab work? So if you're doing something very, very common, if you had a hamstring strain, very common one might be some banded hamstring work. And that will work very effectively. So you're increasing blood flow to the area, you're getting those muscle fibers sliding again, you're getting that fascia moving around. But there's rarely an upper limit on where that's going to go. So do you go with a unweighted variation once a day for 10 minutes, so 5 sets of 15 reps each leg? Then we might bring in some banded work. Do we then have to get a second band? Do I then move on to a slightly weighted variation once I fulfill the criteria of X, Y, and Z? Do I look for pain? Do I look for DOMS? What is the rate, or what is the indication that I move on to the next stage in my progression? Now, we are living in an age where more of this information is available to you than ever before, but I'm going to put a strong asterisk next to that of make sure the information you're getting is relevant to you and your sporting outcomes or the performance outcomes you want, and also make sure it's coming from a credible source. A lot of the time when we look up particular injury rehab, we'll be looking in forums. Maybe if it's an RSI injury and you're a powerlifter, you might be looking in a bodybuilding forum. And that rate of progression, that eventual outcome is going to be completely different from where you need to go and how you need to go there. So have a look online, have a look at some of the studies if you have that ability to read scientific studies, or go and look at some other powerlifters, and a lot of them are vlogging their stuff. Maybe it will take you 2 or 3 hours of picking through it, might take a week or so for you to cherry pick a few of those pieces of information, and then start getting through that, understanding that process. How quickly did they progress? Are they on PEDs? Are they not on PEDs? Was their injury similar to yours, or was it not injury, or was it an injury very, very different from yours? Now, moving on from that, and step 4 is trusting the process. So we've initially assessed the injury. We've then sought some help from a professional. Then we've put a plan in place, maybe on our own or with their help. And when we're going through this, we have to trust the process. Injury rehabilitation is very rarely a linear progress. We will rarely have this one where day 2 is better than day 1, day 3 is better than day 2, day 4 is better than day 3, and so on. Most of the time, we'll slightly improve, then we'll drop back, slightly improve, and then we'll drop back. Now, your job as the athlete here is to trust this process. You trust that you've made all the right decisions, you've spoken to the right people, the plan you have put in place is the correct plan. You must now act on that plan. So it's a quote that's come up a few times in our videos in the last few weeks. I believe it's from Chris Williamson, of talking about the thing is not doing the thing. Doing all the research isn't doing your rehab. Going to the physio isn't doing your rehab. Writing out your plans and progression isn't doing the rehab. You going to the gym or lying down on your sitting room floor is doing the rehab, and it's your job to do it. The hour once or ideally twice a week you'll spend with a professional isn't going to be where the majority of the work is done. That's where you're going to learn how to rehab it. That's where they'll be able to keep an eye on you and see how you're progressing. But the work is done in the gym or on your floor at home. So make sure you as the athlete are following through on your side of the deal. Now, it will come a day when maybe you did that rehab work, the same session on a Monday, and now it's Tuesday evening and everything feels a bit more sore. Maybe you don't feel quite as strong when you're going through that range of motion. You trust the process. You follow through. You carry out that plan. Maybe if it's a case where 3 sessions in a row, it continues to be a slight bit more achy, then that's the point where you go to the expert, you ask again, you assess that plan again, but that is not your job to do on your own. Your job is to show up, do the session, and then show up again the next day.
Now, the last area we need to adjust is the program. Now, the programming might need not to be adjusted at all. There might be no changes needed. For example, if we're talking about that RSI in your elbows, a little bit of achiness in both elbows when you're squatting, you're 3 or 4 more sessions to go. You don't think it's going to get worse, and it doesn't seem to be getting worse. Then you continue on with your peak as you're planned, and you don't make any adjustments. And then after the competition is when you start making big changes. However, if something is incredibly sore, it looks like it's going to get a lot sore, and it has been getting sore as you progress. You may need to adjust the exercise selection. You may need to adjust the volume or the intensity of that training depending on what's going on. So if things are very, very severe, you kind of have to get this meet done. It's nationals, you've just qualified for it, and you can power through. It doesn't hurt in your bench, your elbows don't hurt in your deadlift, but you need to keep going. Somehow this might be an adjustment, maybe even in the exercise selection. So in a dire case, all of these adjustments aren't ideal programming, but they are adjustments based on what's happening because an unfortunate circumstance where that injury has gone beyond the threshold of allowing you to keep doing the same thing. So let's say those elbows are getting much sore. They've gone from a 4 to 5 out of 10 to a 7 to 8 after the next 2 sessions. Maybe for 1 or 2 sessions, you literally have to go and do some safety bar squats to keep the loading through your legs. Now, this isn't ideal. It's not comp specific, but it is better than forcing through that pain, because otherwise the other option might be that you can't do any squats. You're too painful to do the squats, but that 2 or 3 session break, that maybe 10, 14 days of break might be enough just to let you do that competition. Now, of course, is this ideal for injury rehab? Probably not, but the nature of the sport is that you're probably going to get hurt. You understand that, and making those sacrifices is worth it for you. So this less than ideal scenario change is still better than, for example, doing no squatting at all. Maybe we're doing some safety bar squats, maybe we're doing some belt squats, whatever it is to keep that loading through the legs. So we just have to be a bit dynamic with the adjustments we're making. Maybe you've been told that you can continue to do some deadlifting because your hamstring is sore, but you can't go very heavy. You've got 3 weeks left. So what's the option? It's to up that volume on those lighter weights, because we're trying to keep some stimulus through that system. Is that higher volume ideal for a heavier single in 3 weeks time or 4 weeks time? Not really, but it is still a much better scenario than going heavy and tearing your hamstring or not doing any deadlifts at all. So adjusting based on what's going on is the name of the game here. Being smart, applying as much stimulus to that area as you can without making that injury worse is the name of the game. That's the most important thing, and that's how we need to approach those situations. So some of them, it's training as normal. The physio said, look, your pec or shoulder isn't going to get any worse if you keep training for the next 3 or 4 weeks. If as long as it stays maybe 4 or 5 out of 10, they might give you a pain scale or symptoms to look for. They say keep training. If it gets worse, stop. But if it's okay, if it doesn't progress, you keep going. So you don't adjust your programming. So it all depends on what those injuries are. And you'll have things playing in like your past experience, your advice from your therapist that you've seen, from your coach. Maybe you take some advice from your teammates as you're training. They said, look, I had that same injury before, and instead of really heavy deadlifts, I did some, I don't know, rack pulls or something random like that. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter in particular. It just matters that you're being a bit creative, you're being thoughtful about the situation, you're not being stupid and pushing through that injury, because that's probably not the good idea if it's sufficiently sore enough. So Be smart about it. Adjust when you need to adjust. Understand that while this new training isn't ideal, the adjustment to your plan isn't ideal, it's still better than just not doing anything in most circumstances. Now, if you want to improve your powerlifting program, check out the Sika Strength app on iOS and Android. There's a lot of different options for powerlifters there. There's our powerlifting mainstream program where we've had some massive PBs. Most recently, we've had Jamie hit a 300 kilo squatting competition, 302.5 kilo deadlift, 185 kilo bench press in competition. He just ran the program right into the competition. You can run the individual programs like the bench program, you can run the deadlift program or the squat program, and there will be a low bar specific squat program with some adjustments coming to the app in the not so distant future. So check that out on iOS and Android.